Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching. Streaks of plasma fire carved the void like lightning over black water. Above the fractured orbits of Valmora 9, two alien armadas clashed in a chaotic ballet of destruction. The Varnak fleet, massive blade-shaped vessels with carapace-like armor and vertical propulsion fins, hammered the Delcar formation from high orbit. The Delcar answered with bursts of compressed antimatter torpedoes, their ships sleek, serpentine, wrapped in iridescent alloy that shimmered as it bled vapor trails. Sensors blurred, comms fractured. The system's traffic relays had collapsed within the first 5 minutes of engagement. Caught between the carnage, a human convoy moved slowly. 7 ships, stripped-down colonial freighters, hulls scorched from old journeys. Their engines wheezed low-frequency thrums, barely enough to hold a steady course. Green-blue transponders blinked in uniform rhythm, civilian, non-combatant. The ID tags pulsed in 12 languages and 5 broadcast protocols. Captain Ray Moreau stood on the bridge of the Kestrel Dawn, the convoy's lead ship. His uniform was civilian transport gray, his face pale under emergency lighting. He clutched the side rail as the vessel shook from another distant blast. "We shouldn't be here," muttered Navigation Officer Brenna Yill, a slender woman with wide eyes fixed on the viewport. "We're not even registering on military channels anymore. They're jamming everything." Ray's mind raced. The Council had promised this sector would be safe for neutral passage. The war wasn't supposed to reach Valmora 9. The Kestrel Dawn's nav display stuttered, then froze. On the edge of the radar, a massive heat bloom surged. Ray leaned forward. "What the hell is that?" He never got an answer. The blast came without light. A pressure wave of searing particles obliterated the aft of the convoy in a silent, blinding instant. The Vega's Reach, Sunward Echo, and Mariner's End disappeared before their names reached the emergency broadcast. The Kestrel Dawn tore open from mid-hull, atmosphere vented in a silent scream. Ray Moreau was flung backward, his body slamming into the bulkhead. Gravity failed. Steel split like paper. The last thing he saw was the blinking civilian tag flicker once, then vanish, like a dying heartbeat in the dark. His last breath froze mid-exhale as the cold took him. Not in fire, but in vacuum. The universe didn't even blink. Aboard the Tarnik Ascendant, Admiral Voskai of the Delcar Navy surveyed the battlefield through one of his many ocular lenses. His 6-fingered hand tapped along the console in mechanical rhythm. "Unregistered detonation in Sector C," one of his tacticians rasped. "Severe plasma flux. Non-combatants caught in the blast radius." Voskai turned a single eye toward the screen. Charred wreckage, scatter signatures, life signs, 0. He made a clicking noise in his throat. "Collateral, unavoidable. Log it." Thousands of kilometers away, aboard the Varnak dreadnought Ishtok Var, a similar report echoed. "Civilian anomaly neutralized during plasma burst," reported Commander Jartoon, his segmented mandibles clacking in bored precision. His exoskeleton, stained in faded crimson from long-forgotten campaigns, gleamed dully under the flickering bridge lights. "Tragic," his superior grunted, mandibles clacking in irritation. "Footnote it. Use Category 9. Accidental void contact. It'll vanish in the next data sweep." The remains of the human convoy drifted in silence, their oxygen trails dissipating like ghosts in the dark. And the galaxy watched. Across thousands of relay points and shadow servers, the feed replayed, again and again. Civilian tags flashing before fire consumed the signal. Cries in broken standard, screaming children, panic, flame, silence. Footage from distant trader probes flooded the networks. One image, of a child clinging to a bulkhead before the hull peeled away, looped on over 600 million civilian comm feeds before being flagged and removed. But no one responded. No embassies raised protest. No alliances convened emergency sessions. Just silence. and the quiet clicking of encryption logs on shadow networks, marking the day humans bled and the stars blinked away. Stations resumed broadcasts of market prices and sports tournaments as if nothing had happened. The Varnak issued a formal statement within hours. While unfortunate, the deaths occurred during a high-risk engagement in neutral territory. Entry at such a time was a tactical miscalculation by an unregistered, unescorted convoy. No intentional strike was executed. The Delcar followed suit. We deeply regret any civilian loss. However, no deliberate action was taken against human vessels. The incident falls under Class C strategic misfire jurisdiction. The Galactic Neutrality Committee convened for 8 minutes. Their conclusion: the situation, though unfortunate, reflects the inherent risks of travel in active military zones. No further investigation will proceed. And from Earth? Nothing. No communique. No retaliation. Not a word from any diplomatic office or military station. News agencies speculated, is this the final test of neutrality? Analysts debated ethics. Activists mourned. But the United Human Directorate remained utterly, absolutely silent. 72 hours passed. On Theron Lax, jewel world of the Delcar Dominion and wartime seat of strategic command, Sensor Officer Drell Valnir yawned behind his monitor. His skin, translucent and purple-veined, pulsed lazily in the station's dim light. Then the console screamed. A gravitational event unlike any known class registered above the upper thermosphere. Not a jump signature, not a warp ripple. A tear. Valnir's tendrils spasmed. "Reactor breach?" he barked. "Negative," another tech snapped. "No, it's folding space. Something's coming through, something big." On the high-altitude orbit array, the atmosphere rippled as if the sky had been punched from the inside. The breach didn't hum. It droned. A low-frequency vibration that bent station hulls and cracked data crystal arrays. Theron Lax's orbital rings groaned like dying titans under their own mass. And then the breach held open. Silent. Suspended. Waiting. Sensors showed no mass, no energy signature, only a growing absence, like a black heartbeat pulsing against the skin of the universe. Valnir stared at the anomaly, unmoving. Around him, the command deck fell into stunned quiet as the data feeds failed to explain what they were seeing. Above Theron Lax, something impossible had begun. The breach pulsed again, and this time something moved within it. From the rent in space-time above Theron Lax, the hull of the JÖRMUNGANDR unfolded like a blade from a scabbard, silent, relentless. Its surface drank the light around it, an obsidian monolith, larger than any ship listed in galactic archives. No insignia adorned its hull, no markings betrayed allegiance or purpose. It simply was. A violation of space, real and undeniable. On the orbital command deck of Theron Lax Prime Station, Commander Velric Thos, a gaunt Delcar with pallid gray skin and crystalline ridges sprouting from his skull, froze mid-instruction. The sensor arrays, systems capable of tracking warp anomalies across parsecs, blinked into null readings. No mass registration, no propulsion signatures. "Sir, we have no lock," shouted Lieutenant Carveth, a younger Delcar whose 4 iridescent eyes darted helplessly between collapsing data streams. Thos gripped the railing in front of the observation deck, his elongated digits curling tighter as the JÖRMUNGANDR completed its slow, ritualistic breach into normal space. He slammed the override panel, forcing a secondary scan. Full spectrum, subquantum, even archaic particle analysis. The displays returned the same message, again and again. No match found. The ship moved with terrifying grace, a leviathan suspended in perfect stillness. Only the subtle distortion waves lapping against Theron Lax's upper atmosphere betrayed its raw presence. Beneath it, orbital rings strained audibly under unseen stress. Civilian traffic scattered like insects before a coming storm. Desperate to regain control of the situation, Thos barked the only order he could. "Scramble orbital defense, all available cruisers, intercept immediately." In low orbit, 4 Delcar assault cruisers powered forward: the Sorntal, Virecht, Nolvaran, and Brekthar. Their hulls shimmered with adaptive shielding, their prows lined with graviton projectors capable of tearing apart capital ships. They never had a chance. The JÖRMUNGANDR did not fire traditional weapons. Without visible discharge, without movement, an invisible shockwave emanated from the warship's ventral arc. In the span of a heartbeat, the Sorntal crumpled in on itself like a paper model crushed by an invisible hand. Fracture lines spiderwebbed across its armored plating before it imploded, leaving behind only drifting slag. The Virecht attempted to veer away, engines blazing, but its course twisted violently mid-burn. Its prow inverted against its aft, folding into itself before detonating in a blossom of debris. The Nolvaran managed a single panicked broadcast, cut off as its bridge section disintegrated into a mist of atomized alloy. The Brekthar lasted the longest, 6 agonizing seconds, before an unseen force carved through its midsection, splitting the cruiser clean in half. Escape pods ejected in desperate sprays, only to be swallowed by the silent void, as the two halves drifted apart in slow, mocking symmetry. On the command deck, Thos staggered back from the viewport. The Delcar staff murmured, their voices strangled by terror. No orders were shouted, no emergency maneuvers triggered. For the first time in living memory, a Delcar war room fell into absolute, hopeless silence. Some instinctively reached for communication relays. Others simply froze, paralyzed by the sight. And then, another ship. The 5th, the Drenval, a Varnak recon frigate that had been patrolling nearby, broke formation and turned sharply to retreat. It never cleared the engagement zone. The JÖRMUNGANDR's dorsal batteries, unseen to the naked eye, activated for the first time. A single lance of compressed gravitational distortion lanced forward, invisible save for the warping halo it left in its wake. The Drenval sheared in two with surgical precision. Twin geysers of atmosphere and bodies spilled into the dark before both halves ignited, spinning away like broken wings. No alarms blared, no warnings sounded. Only silence remained. Inside the JÖRMUNGANDR, on the bridge sealed deep within its armored heart, the atmosphere was no less oppressive. The command deck was sparse, utilitarian, efficient. Dim bronze light glinted off hardened alloy and carbon black panels. No banners, no fanfare. Just a sense of purpose so dense it could be felt like pressure on the chest. At the center, seated upon a throne-like command chair, was Marshal Sigurd Schneider. His face was carved from stone, angular, pale, with deep-set gray eyes that absorbed every flicker of light without reflection. His uniform was devoid of insignia, save for a simple black bar over his heart, mourning and authority fused into one. His posture was absolute, not rigid by discipline, but by will. Around him, his officers stood at their stations, each bearing the same iron-forged aura. Major Darius Hagen monitored orbital trajectories. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the thick forearms of a man used to gravity-heavy training fields. His jaw was clenched so tightly that the veins along his neck stood out like cords. A holoprojector before him mapped Tharenlax's defense grid in real time. When his daughter's civilian transport had burned in Valmora 9, he hadn't wept. He had requested transfer. Commander Helena Aranyas stood at tactical. Her uniform sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing scars that no regeneration cycle had healed. Her eyes, steel blue, held the hollow exhaustion of a woman who had buried both her children without graves. Every command she issued to the ship's weapon systems was a quiet requiem. Lieutenant Victor Perun operated electronic warfare. Slender, with a precision to his movements that suggested surgical training before war called him otherwise. His brother's name had been etched onto a comm relay salvaged from the wreckage of the Sunward Echo. Perun had retrieved it personally. No one spoke of vengeance. No one declared oaths. The grief was in the angles of their bodies, the deliberate calm of their voices, the perfection of every movement. Each man and woman aboard the JÖRMUNGANDR carried a silence heavier than rage. Schneider did not look at them. He did not need to. Their existence on this bridge was declaration enough. The main display cast a muted projection of Tharon Lax's orbital map. Red markers flickered into existence as more Delcar and Varnak reinforcements scrambled to intercept. Marshal Schneider leaned forward slightly, the only movement he had made since the breach. "First wave neutralized," reported Hagen, his voice stripped of anything resembling satisfaction. "Additional contacts incoming. Estimated arrival in 6 minutes." Schneider nodded once, almost imperceptibly. He tapped a command rune embedded into the chair's armrest. A low vibration thrummed through the hull, an acknowledgement from the ship itself. Erinyes keyed in the targeting array. "Ready for next sequence." Perun adjusted interference pulses, weaving blind zones across the enemy's tactical network. Electronic environment compromised. They will struggle to coordinate. The bridge was a living engine of execution. No debates, no hesitations, only certainty. For a moment, silence ruled again. Schneider rose to his feet, the movement slow, measured. He stood tall under the dim lights, armor matte black, worn and battle-scarred from conflicts no alien historian had ever recorded. A relic forged for a war Earth had never admitted it fought. His gaze swept the projections. Then, the enemy signatures. He spoke at last, each word delivered with the weight of a funeral bell. "Advance to primary objective." The JÖRMUNGANDR adjusted its trajectory, toward the heart of Tharon Lax. Each slow pulse of its engines distorted local gravity wells, dragging at satellites, choking comms arrays, pulling Tharon Lax's very orbit into trembling unease. The silent god of war had arrived, and it had no need for mercy. The first incoming fleets arrived in disarray. Above Tharon Lax, the void bloomed with flashes as Varnak and Delcar reinforcements surged into the sector. Hundreds of ships, battle cruisers, destroyers, troop carriers, ripped from folds in space, pouring into the engagement zone in chaotic, uncoordinated droves. The Varnak, their dreadnoughts lurching forward like armored predators, vented plasma bursts in wide arcs across the orbital lanes. The Delcar, more precise but equally desperate, deployed flotillas of interceptor wings and gravitic mines in a scattered screen. No one led. Everyone reacted. The JÖRMUNGANDR moved through the center of the maelstrom with the slow inevitability of a falling mountain. Its hull, still dark and gleaming like drowned stone, absorbed weapons fire without so much as a ripple. Torpedoes detonated harmlessly against layered singularity shields. Graviton beams bent wide as if reality itself refused to strike the vessel. From the bridge, Marshal Sigurd Schneider watched the carnage unfold, with the detachment of a surgeon preparing for an incision. "Engagement pattern Sigma 7, he said, voice low. Major Darius Hagen nodded once. His fingers, calloused and steady, worked the fire control interfaces. Commander Helena Erinyes adjusted the fleet positioning overlays, her movements precise and unhurried, like a pianist at rehearsal. Outside, the JÖRMUNGANDR answered the chaos not with defense, but with assertion. Twin batteries along its flanks ignited. Beams of hyper-compressed gravitic energy lashed out in sweeping arcs. Where they touched, they didn't explode or burn, they crumpled. Entire squadrons of alien frigates buckled inward like wet paper, their midsections snapping in on themselves before shattering into metallic shards. A Delcar cruiser, its elongated chassis twisting to avoid debris, collided mid-drift with a fleeing Varnak gunship. Both vessels erupted into a blossom of molten wreckage. Inside Tharon Lax Prime Station, Sector Admiral Korvash Triel, a Delcar with a crown of branching horn plates curling over his skull, slammed a trembling hand against the tactical display. "Coordinate targeting solutions," he barked, his voice cracking. His lieutenants, many little more than fresh bloods, their skin still translucent from bio-Regan cycles, fumbled across control consoles, trying to compensate for the breakdown in fleet discipline. Outside the station, the JÖRMUNGANDR released its second strike. From its core emitter, unseen to all but the deepest scanning arrays, a ripple of folded space emerged. No color, no sound, only distortion, like an invisible shockwave moving at near relativistic speed. It expanded outward, a perfect sphere growing from the ship's heart, swallowing orbital platforms, communications satellites, defense grids. This was not a weapon designed to kill, it was a scalpel meant to humiliate. As the wave passed, Theron Lax's orbital defenses simply shut down. Bulkhead doors sealed automatically, trapping personnel inside maintenance corridors. Graviton scaffolds collapsed under their own skewed mass vectors. Entire power grids fried simultaneously, leaving vast stretches of the planet's upper hemisphere blacked out. Admiral Triel watched in horror as Theron Lax's planetary defense grid, systems that had withstood sieges across generations, went dark without a single shot fired against them. "Impossible," he whispered. Beside him, Communications Officer Vel Drax, a young Delcar with mottled emerald skin and 4 twitching ocular ridges, tried to force a channel open. "Signal jamming, Admiral, except it's not jamming. It's like the commands themselves are being rejected." Triel stared at the cascading error logs. "No, Lieutenant," he muttered. "It's worse. It's that we're not even recognized." Aboard the JÖRMUNGANDR, Commander Irenaeus pivoted slightly to view the updated telemetry. "Orbital grid neutralized," she confirmed, voice clinical. "All station transmissions severed. Civilian broadcasts offline. Internal security protocols triggered." Hagen didn't look up from the fire control matrix. "Tactical facilities? Locked behind their own fail-safes." Marshal Schneider remained silent, a sentinel of stone at the heart of the bridge. His eyes swept the chaos with the slow, deliberate weight of inevitability. The JÖRMUNGANDR continued forward, slipping through collapsing defensive lines without altering course, without urgency. Among the alien fleets, panic blossomed. A Delcar cruiser captain, Admiral Jarvek Sulra, attempted a desperate broadband transmission from his command ship, the Ascendant Vrax. "Unknown human vessel, identify and stand down immediately. You are in violation of..." The transmission cut off mid-sentence. Perun had activated the JÖRMUNGANDR's countermeasure suite, slipping through their comm frequencies like a knife between ribs. Each attempt to hail, to communicate, to warn, crashed against an ocean of null return signals. Inside the Varnak fleet, chaos festered even faster. The Varnak General Krosthal Kresh, a titan of a creature armored in bioforged chitin and cybernetic spines, roared into his tactical uplinks. "All squadrons, strike at core mass, break the human formation." Squadrons of Varnak breacher ships and Delcar frigate wings converged, 500 ships against one. They never reached it. Commander Irenaeus traced fire lanes across the sector map, her expression still and calm. "Engagement corridors plotted," she said. Major Hagen locked the targeting solutions without waiting for confirmation. The JÖRMUNGANDR opened its secondary batteries. Kinetic lances fired in silent succession. They didn't aim at ships. They aimed at the space between them. Invisible ripples tore through the coordinated attack vectors. Gravimetric forces bent trajectories, collapsed drive signatures. Fighters smashed into cruisers. Interceptors tore through their own formations at impossible speeds. They dismantled the attack not in defense, but at inception, unmaking formations before the first shot could find its mark. At Theron Lax's emergency diplomatic center, representatives of neutral factions scrambled across the hallways. Holograms buzzed with frantic meetings. Councillor Belveth of the Arcanis cluster, skin as pale as algae, slammed both fists onto a table of scattered strategic maps. "Someone open contact with the human delegation," he shouted. "Open diplomatic channels, initiate emergency contact protocols, anything." Aides worked feverishly, their 4-fingered hands flashing across crystalline consoles. The JÖRMUNGANDR gave no response to threats, no acknowledgement to requests, no mercy to pleas. Every maneuver was executed with such precision, it seemed less like warfare and more like architecture. a dismantling of an entire theater of operations by sheer, merciless design. In orbit, battleships collided mid-drift, scattering debris fields that cratered civilian satellites. Escape pods spun into the darkness, their occupants screaming into deaf channels. Inside the Delcar command center, Admiral Triel gripped the edges of his console until his knuckles bled blue ichor. "We have to fall back," he said, hoarse. "But sir," Veldrak stammered, "the Council—" Triel turned on him, face pale. "The Council is already dead. They just haven't stopped breathing yet." A final pulse emanated from the JÖRMUNGANDR, slower, colder. Not an attack, an announcement. Gravity itself buckled across the orbital layer of Tharon Lax. Cargo rings sheared from their moorings. Orbital elevators snapped like strands of hair under tension. The upper atmosphere rolled with aurora-like distortions as physics itself rebelled. In the bridge of the JÖRMUNGANDR, amid the shifting glow of dying systems across Tharon Lax's horizon, Marshal Sigurd Schneider finally spoke again. Next phase. The JÖRMUNGANDR moved forward, and the stars seemed to flinch. The aftermath of the orbital collapse left the sector in stunned paralysis. Where once fleets had moved with orchestrated precision, now only drifting hulks and scattered transmissions remained. Amid the silence, as emergency beacons flickered and debris fields thickened around Tharon Lax, the JÖRMUNGANDR pressed deeper into the chaos, not to gloat, not to conquer, but to dismantle. And somewhere beneath the smoldering wreckage of a dying command structure, desperate eyes turned toward darker methods, seeking any weakness inside the monster that would not speak. The first saboteur died before he touched the hull. Disguised as drifting debris, a Delcar infiltration capsule skimmed low against the gravity distortions bleeding from the JÖRMUNGANDR. Inside, Agent Relvak Thun, a wiry creature with skin like bruised glass and a bio-enhanced neural mesh interwoven across his skull, prepared for insertion. His mission: penetrate the vessel, establish a data bridge, and identify its command structures. He never got close. Without warning, an unseen lattice snapped into place, a web of micro-singularity nodes surrounding the ship in layers invisible to conventional sensors. The capsule crumpled instantly, reduced to vaporized particulate matter before Thun could transmit a warning. His last sensory imprint was recorded as a spike of terror before silence consumed him. 12 more infiltration teams followed over the next hour. None returned. No wreckage, no last broadcasts. They did not die fighting. They vanished, forgotten even by the ship that erased them. Some were simply erased without trace, as if space itself had swallowed them whole. Others transmitted fractured images of internal corridors, shifting in impossible configurations, geometry reweaving itself to eject, crush, or erase invaders. To the Delcar High Command, it was as if they were trying to infiltrate a living nightmare stitched from broken laws of physics. Inside the JÖRMUNGANDR, the crew didn't even acknowledge the attempts. On the bridge, Marshal Sigurd Schneider convened a tactical session. The walls dimmed slightly, shifting to muted blues and golds, and the central holoprojector flared to life, displaying real-time fleet compositions, supply lines, and planetary reinforcement grids across Tharon Lax and neighboring systems. "Status," he said, voice flat. "All defensive emplacements were neutralized," reported Commander Arinjes. Her tone, like her posture, was composed and restrained. "We are entering the outer buffer zone of the Delcar Secondary Command Cluster." Major Darius Hagen stepped forward, projecting a new overlay onto the central display. It highlighted fuel depots, uplink towers, and weapon caches stretched across the orbital network. "Recommend precision strikes here, here, and here. No need for saturation bombing. Their infrastructure is exposed." Schneider studied the map without speaking. "Collateral damage will be high," Arinjes added quietly. "Minimal population centers nearby, but not zero." Hagen's jaw flexed. "We've already shown them what we're capable of. This ends faster if we don't pull our punches." Schneider's gaze lingered on the flashing red targets. Then he nodded once. "Controlled strikes. Maximum efficiency. minimum waste. The command was not a rejection of Hagen's strategy, but a refinement. Understood, Hagen said. Schneider turned away, signaling the meeting's end without further ceremony. As the officers resumed their stations, a deeper reality pulsed beneath the surface of the JÖRMUNGANDR's operations. The ship itself wasn't merely following orders. It was anticipating. Each time an enemy formation adjusted its defense perimeter, the JÖRMUNGANDR shifted vector trajectories before human orders finalized. Each time new reinforcements tried to recalibrate a gravitational anchor field, the JÖRMUNGANDR realigned its energy banks to exploit the new fault lines. It fought not with raw brute force, but with knowledge that shouldn't have existed. Lieutenant Perun, curious, initiated a quiet audit within his assigned clearance protocols. What he uncovered tightened the back of his throat. The tactical cortex embedded into the JÖRMUNGANDR's AI core wasn't purely human in origin. It had been built around inverted alien strategic models, specifically accumulated data from Delcar skirmish doctrines, Varnak expansion campaigns, and archival captures from lesser-known extinct empires like the Vostar Ascendancy and the Zuran Consortia. Each alien strategy, each principle of mass engagement or attrition warfare, had been turned against itself. Where the Delcar preferred distributed command autonomy, the JÖRMUNGANDR isolated command uplinks at lightning speed, forcing dependency back onto a crippled core. Where the Varnak relied on brute force vector superiority, the JÖRMUNGANDR rechanneled mass effect fields to create micro-collapses that shattered force concentrations before they could converge. Even obsolete tactics, abandoned by ancient civilizations, had been adapted into asymmetrical countermeasures. They had learned, adapted, perfected. Humanity did not simply overcome. It devoured the lessons of its enemies and wore their failures like armor. Perun closed the audit stream and leaned back in his seat, a cold realization settling over him. They were not just fighting as humans. They were fighting with everything humanity had ever witnessed, stolen, dissected, and re-engineered from the galaxy's most powerful and fallen civilizations. Marshal Schneider stood silently at the center of it all, a man who carried the weight of that silent synthesis in every clipped order, every restrained gesture. There was no triumph in his expression, no satisfaction, only purpose. The JÖRMUNGANDR adjusted course again, gliding towards the Delcar secondary command cluster, orbiting above Tharenlax's northern hemisphere. A tactical readout flickered to life. Orbital munitions stockpiles, encrypted data centers, resupply arrays, all marked for dismantling. No speeches, no ultimatums. Only the relentless execution of a campaign born not from hatred, but from cold, clinical inevitability. On the far edge of the sector, Delcar auxiliary forces attempting to regroup at Platform Sigma 9 found their uplinks scrambled, their maneuvering thrusters locked into endless reinitialization loops. Their warships drifted aimlessly as kinetic penetrators from the JÖRMUNGANDR rained down with terrifying precision. Aboard the bridge, Irenaeus recalculated trajectories, voice steady. Final strikes aligned, targets isolated. Perun monitored the pulse of dying enemy comms, searching for anything that might hint at an organized counterstroke. He found only scattered cries for assistance and encrypted screams. Marshal Schneider watched it all unfold with unreadable eyes. Without a word, he raised one hand. The JÖRMUNGANDR's weapon arrays flared once, silent, brilliant arcs of calculated annihilation sweeping outward. In the distance, the secondary command center broke apart, silent, final, its remains spiraling into decaying orbit, caught in the grip of the planet's trembling magnetic field. The bridge remained quiet, every officer locked in their task. The war wasn't over, but the ones who began it had just glimpsed the shape of their ending. The first sign was the silence. Above the battered orbital plane of Tharenlax, ships that had once charged into battle with the ferocity of ancient predators now drifted warily at the edges of sensor range. Command relays between the Delcar and Varnak fleets crackled, their cross signals hastily stitched together from incompatible systems. Words of distrust, urgency, and fear tangled in the encrypted channels. But one sentiment eclipsed all others: survival. It wasn't the war between the Delcar and Varnak anymore. It was a last stand against something neither had accounted for. Temporary accords were transmitted, hastily coded alliances built on desperation rather than trust. The Delcar flagship Soltesh Var opened a shared fire corridor with the Varnak dreadnought HFY. Across the battered expanse, squadrons from both species shifted formation, locking coordinates into an overlapping net designed for one purpose: to stop the JÖRMUNGANDR. On the bridge of the JÖRMUNGANDR, the main tactical display illuminated the emergent enemy formations. Marshal Sigurd Schneider stood at the center, silent as ever, arms folded behind his back. Commander Helena Erinyes refined the engagement grid, while Major Darius Hagen calibrated fire patterns and adjusted orbital parameters without a word. At the electronic warfare console, Lieutenant Victor Perun prepared the final sequence. Then, 12 primary targets appeared on the projection, 12 heavily armored vessels forming the backbone of the hastily assembled defense. Targets acquired. Without fanfare, the JÖRMUNGANDR executed a synchronized assault. 12 beams, coalesced gravimetric lances wrapped in folded space sheaths, lanced outward in perfect unison. They struck without warning. The first 3 cruisers simply folded inward, their reactor cores imploding under pressures meant to simulate the event horizons of micro-singularities. No explosion, no debris cloud, just a collapse into nothing. The next 5 ships suffered worse. Their mass fields inverted, dragging their own hulls apart molecule by molecule. Entire decks tore free, flinging screaming soldiers into the vacuum before the remnants flared into silent bursts of radiation. The remaining 4 ships attempted evasive maneuvers. They barely had time to alter course before kinetic penetrators, a swarm of tungsten rods accelerated to near-relativistic speeds, punched through their central spines. Life support systems ruptured, shield generators sputtered, core containment fields detonated in synchronized patterns, leaving behind only drifting carcasses and slowly expanding clouds of frozen atmosphere. In the civilian sectors orbiting Tharanlax, the reaction was immediate. Colonies designed to endure generations of siege collapsed into panicked exodus. Shuttles overloaded with civilians abandoned orbital platforms, leaving entire districts to drift powerless into decay. Commercial zones, once alive with interspecies trade, shut down with stunning speed, barricades thrown up, locks sealed, desperate refugees scrambling for non-existent escape routes. Images flooded the darknets and open comm feeds. Low-resolution footage captured the JÖRMUNGANDR, advancing through the debris field, indifferent, serene. Its hull absorbed incoming fire like a void swallowing light. Not a single retaliatory strike so much as grazed its surface. Across thousands of systems, the footage spread like wildfire. The codename, the Blade of Silence, appeared first, coined by a Delcar war correspondent moments before his transmission cut out mid-broadcast. Moments later, the Varnak refugee networks began whispering a new name: the God that does not speak. Within 2 standard hours, those names dominated the network feeds across neutral territories, pirate enclaves, and even sheltered Confederacy cores. On the JÖRMUNGANDR's bridge, Perun activated the final sequence for the operation. The center of Varnak Orbital Command, a platform designated Vorkesh Prime, flashed onto his console. It had once been the heart of the Varnak strategic intelligence grid across the sector, a sprawling fortress of hardened data cores and armored bastions. Now, it was simply a target. Perun's hands moved in crisp clinical motions. He selected the bombardment coordinates with the detachment of a surgeon marking incisions. No anger, no satisfaction, only duty. He remembered his brother's voice, fractured in the final transmission from the Sunward Echo. Remembered the way the last syllable of his name had twisted into static. He did not need rage, he needed precision. The JÖRMUNGANDR's forward batteries reoriented. Tactical plotting flashed green. Perun gave a single word: execute. 3 magnetogravitic lances erupted outward, striking at precise structural nodes along Vorkesh Prime's superstructure. The first lance severed its primary reactor conduit. The second carved open its command tier. The third punctured its data core clusters. The effect was instantaneous. Without its power regulators, the platform's own gravitational compensators twisted inward. Hull sections twisted, compressed, then detonated outward in a slow, balletic explosion, fragments spiraling into expanding halos of burning debris. Through it all, the JÖRMUNGANDR did not deviate course. On the bridge, no one spoke. Perun sat back slightly, his face a blank mask. The data feeds showed 0 surviving signatures, no enemy commands, no distress signals, only silence. Irenyes glanced at him once, briefly, and then turned back to recalibrate new vectors of engagement. Marshal Schneider observed it all without comment. His gaze lingered on the remnants of the Varnak command station, then shifted to the broader chaos unraveling across the sector. They were dismantling not just fleets, but civilizations, and the galaxy was watching. In scattered sectors light years away, edited footage of the battle played across illegal feeds and diplomatic war rooms alike. Footage slowed, looped, analyzed frame by frame. The way the JÖRMUNGANDR advanced without hesitation. The way its weapons struck with such terrible, coordinated beauty. The silence of its victims. In the minds of those who saw the recordings, terror fermented into awe. Fear became reverence. Despair became myth. The blade of silence. The god that does not speak. In truth, it had been neither. It had been humanity's answer to a universe that thought them weak. On Tharenlax, amidst the crumbling remains of once mighty bastions, survivors huddled in the shattered ruins, whispering to each other in broken voices. Some cursed the humans. Some begged unseen gods for mercy. Some simply stared into the blackness of space, waiting for a judgment that had already been passed. Aboard the JÖRMUNGANDR, the bridge lights dimmed slightly as the ship recalibrated power for its next offensive maneuver. Marshal Schneider raised one hand, an unspoken command, and the ship shifted trajectory once more, gliding forward through the wreckage as if carving a path into the bones of history itself. The war had changed. The galaxy knew it. The galaxy feared it. And somewhere, in the silence between stars, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. And the blade kept moving. The ruins of Vorkesh Prime still glowed faintly in the upper orbit of Tharenlax, casting broken shadows across the debris fields. Amid the drifting wreckage, a different kind of silence took hold. Not the silence of death, but of something worse: acknowledgement. Across the galaxy, eyes turned from the chaos to the source. It was no longer enough to resist. It was time to listen. And as the JÖRMUNGANDR moved through the aftermath without slowing, the voice of Earth prepared to break the silence they had once mistaken for weakness. The transmission request blinked on the JÖRMUNGANDR's main comms interface, a pulse coded in ancient human cipher, designed to cut through any civilian or military relay between sectors. Marshal Sigurd Schneider reviewed the authorization without expression. The insignia embedded in the signature was unmistakable. Directorate Command, Earth. Without a word, he gave a slight nod to Lieutenant Victor Perun. On the center of the bridge, the tactical displays dimmed. In their place, a new projection materialized, a secure feed directly linked to the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council. In the heart of the neutral diplomatic world of Atraxis Prime, counselors of 100 species sat in stunned silence as the connection stabilized. The image that appeared on the central dais was not the expected Earth diplomat, nor an ambassador cloaked in pleasantries. It was Commander Helena Irenyes. She stood alone, framed by the somber steel of the JÖRMUNGANDR's primary broadcast deck. Her figure was stark against the backdrop, tall, unyielding, adorned not in military regalia, but in a plain ceremonial uniform, pure black, devoid of rank insignia, a silent testament to mourning. The lights of the broadcast chamber caught the scar running across her forearm, the deep lines carved into her face from years of loss and war, left unsoftened by time or treatment. She carried no weapons. Her hands were steady behind her back, her shoulders square. Her eyes, steel gray and immovable, swept across the council as if she could see through the thousands of light years between them. When she spoke, her voice was firm, resonant, stripped of warmth or fury. It was the voice of a tomb being sealed. Earth acknowledges the existence of hostilities. The translation matrices across the grand chamber stumbled for a second, caught between the simplicity of the words and the weight behind them. Councillor Verath Trell, a towering figure of plated turquoise scales, representing the Delcar Dominion, shifted uneasily in his seat. His secondary breathing vents fluttered, an unconscious reaction to fear. Commander Irenaeus continued, her expression unreadable. Consider this an adjustment of posture. The gathered representatives, many still nursing the delusion that humanity's silence meant submission, exchanged uncertain glances. Whispers broke out across the lower tiers of the chamber. Irenaeus let the silence fester for a heartbeat. Then she spoke again. For decades, she said, her voice unwavering, we chose silence. We chose observation. We chose patience. Her hand settled over the mourning band at her wrist, a relic from Earth's first diaspora wars, worn smooth with time. But our neutrality, she said, voice level, died with our civilians at Valmora 9. No tremor, no anger, just truth, sharpened to a point. Now, Irenaeus continued, her gaze steady and unflinching, it's our turn. She leaned into the feed, the cold gleam of purpose catching in her eyes. Prepare yourselves. The transmission ended. No outro, no farewell, only silence. A silence that was not absence, but a wound, gaping and raw, across the mind of every civilization watching. The counselors stared at the empty projection in horror. Some tried to speak. Some tried to run simulations, draft new resolutions, compose hasty pleas. But all their words collapsed under the same truth. It was already too late. Some sputtered demands for immediate emergency sessions. Others issued partial evacuation orders to their embassies on Earth. Several simply froze, unable to process what had just unfolded. But in the cold, calculated minds of those few who understood the weight of human history, the old wars, the forgotten conflicts, the scars written in the DNA of the species, they understood one truth above all others. The galaxy was no longer watching humanity. Humanity was watching the galaxy, and it had decided to act. On board the JÖRMUNGANDR, the bridge remained shrouded in the low, rhythmic thrum of readiness. No one spoke of the transmission. Schneider returned to the primary command station as the ship's sensors flickered with a new alert. Perun's hands moved rapidly across his console. Unscheduled gravitational disturbance at system edge, he reported. Inbound microfold signature, single vessel, stealth class by the residual trail. Major Hagen frowned, already rerouting power to the forward batteries. Commander Irenaeus, her expression unchanged since the broadcast, simply nodded to the bridge crew. Intercept trajectory, she said. Schneider's gaze flicked toward the main viewport, where the faint ripple of a fold breach was coalescing against the distant stars. The JÖRMUNGANDR's dorsal batteries calibrated silently. A single pulse, a compressed gravitic burst sharpened to a molecular edge, flashed outward. In the silence that followed, the fold breach spasmed once. Then, debris. Fragmented hull plating spun into the void, the remnants of a vessel that had hoped to breach the system undetected. A broken strut, half a comms dish, and a smoldering chunk of stealth armor floated listlessly across the sensor field. Schneider watched the wreckage with detached calm. One piece of debris, a twisted section of outer hull, slowly rotated as it tumbled, bearing the faded insignia of the Delcar Special Reconnaissance Corps. A smirk curled at his lips, just enough to betray the disdain beneath his composure. They still believe, he said quietly, almost to himself, that we're here to negotiate. The JÖRMUNGANDR advanced once more, engines thrumming beneath the deck, carving its inexorable path deeper into Tharenlak's space. In the darkened silence that followed, it became clear. There would be no more warnings, no more restraint. The galaxy's last illusions about humanity had died alongside their diplomats' words, and Earth's judgment had just begun. Frustration festered among the alien command remnants. Every infiltration attempt had failed, every sabotage effort erased before it even touched the human vessel. Strategies that had once conquered empires crumbled like dust against the silent armor of the JÖRMUNGANDR. Desperation left them no choice. With no more subterfuge to offer, no more tricks to play, the Delkar and Varnak high commands issued a single, brutal directive across all surviving fleets. Assemble everything, everyone, and crush the human warship in a full, unrelenting mass assault. The alarms triggered across the JÖRMUNGANDR's bridge with a muted, almost respectful chime. Perun was the first to report. His voice was sharp, firm. Enemy mass translation event. Full spectrum. 312 ships inbound. Schneider stepped forward as the tactical feed expanded, revealing 3 massive concentric rings forming around their position. Just as predicted, a coordinated assault. Not a scattering of desperate skirmishes. This was an organized extermination effort. Outside, the stars blurred as hundreds of warships bent the heavens with their arrival. At the heart of the converging rings, the JÖRMUNGANDR remained still for a moment longer, as if considering its next breath. Schneider's voice cut the tension like a blade. "Perun, open the way." Perun's expression remained unchanged as he keyed in the deployment sequence, dispatching drone wings armed with phase-shifted warheads, each calibrated to destabilize formation density without outright destruction. "Engagement protocols active," he confirmed. "Erinyes," Schneider said, turning slightly toward tactical. "Deep strike. Maximum disruption." Commander Helena Erinyes acknowledged with a single sharp nod. Her hands moved with lethal economy, plotting vectors that punched deep into the enemy's rear coordination lines. Schneider's gaze locked on Major Hagen. "Hagen, no one escapes." Hagen's mouth tightened, not in a smile, but something colder. "Acknowledged." The JÖRMUNGANDR stirred. Its engines flared once, a brief pulse of raw gravitational distortion that rippled across the battlefield. Then it moved, straight into the first ring. The outermost layer of the alien alliance, a sprawling web of Varnak shock cruisers, Delkar heavy carriers, and auxiliary support vessels, tightened their formation, attempting to overlap fields of fire, a net designed to crush and contain. It collapsed immediately. Perun's destabilizer drones detonated along the ring's central axis. Shields folded. Structural harmonics screamed under twisted physics. Varnak cruisers spiraled out of formation, slamming into Delkar destroyers with the elegance of falling towers. The JÖRMUNGANDR didn't dodge. It didn't weave or scatter. It punched through the disintegrating barrier like a spear hurled by a god. The second ring adjusted, desperate to compensate. Commander Erinyes executed her deep strike vectors with brutal precision. A forward salvo of kinetic torpedoes shredded the second layer's electronic warfare ships, carriers that were supposed to coordinate the engagement. Without their command nodes, the alien ships hesitated. Less than a second, but in that sliver of time, it was enough. The JÖRMUNGANDR's dorsal batteries opened fire in a synchronized barrage, targeting shield regulators and propulsion junctions. Every shot selected not for maximum damage, but for maximum collapse. Shields flickered, engines sputtered. Fire bloomed across the second ring. What had been an assault turned into an execution, order crumbling faster than the ships themselves. Alien vessels tumbled into one another, unable to coordinate evasion or support. Plasma explosions blossomed like terrible flowers in the dark. On the Delkar flagship Torventh Sal, Admiral Kalthrex Surva, a skeletal figure with retractable crest spines and silvered dermal plating, screamed into his command console for retreat protocols. But the command codes were already corrupted. Perun's override scripts, embedded via drone transmission, had rewritten core navigation systems across half the fleet. Across the alien formations, systems collapsed from the inside out. Sensors blacked out. Communications fractured into static. Targeting arrays froze in endless recalibration loops. No one understood how deep the infiltration ran until it was far too late. The second ring buckled. The third, the densest and most heavily armored, held formation for a single beat longer, long enough for their commanders to realize they were already dead. Major Hagen coordinated the final strike pattern with mechanical efficiency. "Interception lattice active," he said. The Jörmungandr's ventral batteries unleashed compressed hypervelocity rounds, not at the ships themselves, but into the precise gravitic balance points holding the third ring together. The result was catastrophic. Entire formations twisted inward under their own failing mass compensation fields. Support ships collided with battle cruisers. Dreadnoughts sheared into one another like wet stone against a grinding wheel. Where once there had been order, there was now only collapse. Enemy vessels veered wildly, trying to pull away, trying to escape. Schneider watched it all unfold without a flicker of reaction. His hands rested calmly behind his back as the tactical feeds lit with warning signals from the collapsing enemy systems. From the fractured remnants of the Varnak command hierarchy came broken evacuation orders. From the Delcar fleet, desperate emergency jumps were plotted. Too late, too clustered, corrupted before they could finish calculations. In every quadrant, the same grim tableau repeated: ships spinning uncontrolled, crew abandoning decks as internal gravities failed, escape pods crushed in the wake of crumbling hulls. Through it all, the Jörmungandr advanced in a perfectly straight line, no course corrections, no evasive maneuvers, like a verdict moving through disorder. Above the battlefield, the darkened wreckage formed drifting fields of glowing debris, catching the dying light of Tharenlax's distant star. Schneider leaned forward slightly, his voice low but unmistakable. "Continue forward." The order moved through the bridge like a second heartbeat. The Jörmungandr powered through the collapsing remnants, engines humming with the restrained violence of a contained singularity. A battered Varnak heavy cruiser, its aft section torn to ribbons, drifted across the Jörmungandr's trajectory. No weapon was fired. The human warship simply accelerated and crushed the cruiser beneath its mass, scattering it into atomized fragments. On the Delcar flagship, Admiral Surva's final transmission was intercepted moments before his ship detonated. Static, half a scream, and the echo of one word: run. It didn't matter. No one would run fast enough. Behind the Jörmungandr, the battlefield was no longer a war zone. It was a graveyard. Ships listed sideways in slow orbits. Command signals sputtered and died. Across Tharenlax, civilian sectors received distorted fragments of the battle, grainy footage of alien vessels colliding, melting, falling apart under an invisible, inexorable force. In council chambers across the galaxy, leaders watched in horror. In pirate enclaves and mercenary rings, smugglers stared at the feeds with silent, paralyzed awe. The Jörmungandr did not slow, did not acknowledge, did not yield. Piece by piece, system by system, the last defenses of the Delcar and Varnak alliances were dismantled, not by overwhelming force, but by precision, by inevitability, by intellect wearing the cold armor of vengeance. And as the Jörmungandr pierced the final remnants of the third ring, leaving only drifting ruin in its wake, one truth burned into the mind of every witness. The humans had not simply come for war. They had come for victory. The final screams of collapsing hulls had not yet faded when the enemy's last desperate gambit unfurled across the void. Above the fractured battlefield of Tharenlax, shattered fleets clawed into formation, battered dreadnoughts and limping carriers pulling into a crude defensive wedge around a flickering mass at their center. The last command cluster, a sprawling nexus of alien leadership nodes anchored in geosynchronous orbit over the capital. They fought not for victory, but for the denial of their inevitable end. From the bridge of the Jörmungandr, Marshal Schneider watched the enemy's final stand assemble, not with admiration nor pity, just inevitability. The main viewport framed the dying light of the defensive bastion, a bleeding wound of flickering shields and broken ships barely holding cohesion. Behind him, the command crew stood ready. Major Darius Hagen monitored the collapsing vectors of the remaining alien formations. Commander Irenaeus prepared the final assault trajectories. Lieutenant Perun continued to flood enemy networks with false telemetry, weaponizing their last attempts at communication against them. No hesitation, no deviation. Schneider's voice was a blade drawn across the void. Target: Enemy Command Corps. A brief pause, like the slow, final heartbeat before a battlefield charge. Route: Direct. The JÖRMUNGANDR answered. Its engines rumbled low, gathering power, distorting the space around it with localized gravitational compression fields. The ship aligned its prow toward the heart of the enemy bastion and accelerated. The remaining alien fleets reacted immediately. Missiles, plasma bolts, and gravitic mines surged outward in dense waves. The void between stars lit with furious desperation, rage without hope, fire without command. But the JÖRMUNGANDR did not weave, did not slow. Missiles detonated around it in rippling spheres of force and flame. Plasma bursts scorched its outer plating. Kinetic projectiles, hurled at relativistic speeds, fractured harmlessly against layered singularity fields. Still it advanced. At the core of the alien command, the Delcar Admiral Vosnar Keth, a towering form sheathed in silver chitin, his crest flaring with stress, bellowed for full fire concentration. At his side, Varnak High General Krosh Drektu, a being of living armored bone and retractable spikes, issued the same desperate order through subspace comms. Nothing changed. The JÖRMUNGANDR plowed through the defenses like a falling star, its prow cleaving the dense maelstrom of fire and steel. Inside the bridge, the hum of the engines rose to a low, relentless roar, felt more through the soles of the crew's boots than heard. Major Hagen called out calmly, his voice cutting through the rising pressure. Core shield saturation at 80%, collapsing under own output. Commander Irenaeus traced new firing lines across the tactical display. Orbital stabilizers failing, gravitational anchor points unstable. Perun glanced up from his console. Enemy comms in recursive collapse. Command signals cannibalizing each other. Schneider's hands remained clasped behind his back, his gaze never leaving the main display. Forward, always forward. The JÖRMUNGANDR's dorsal batteries activated without explicit command, unleashing salvos of gravimetric lances designed not to destroy, but to unbalance. The defensive wedge unraveled as ships veered unpredictably, colliding, rupturing, dragging one another into widening spirals of debris. At the center, the alien command nexus shuddered under its own decaying mass. Its defensive layers peeled away one by one, exposing the raw infrastructure beneath, twisted frameworks of steel, fractured shield nodes flickering like dying stars. Schneider watched as the enemy's last hope disintegrated, as captains abandoned ship, as generals transmitted their final, broken codes into a network collapsing into static. And still, the JÖRMUNGANDR advanced, straight through the ruins, straight through the burning remnants of what had once been an empire. As the ship closed the final distance, a low, rhythmic pulse trembled through the bridge, the impending collapse of the system's gravitational integrity, the last breath of a battlefield that no longer existed. Schneider stepped forward. The main display shifted, locking onto the core reactor of the alien nexus, an unstable fusion mass spinning wildly as containment fields flickered. A single command appeared at Schneider's fingertips. He pressed it. The JÖRMUNGANDR's ventral cannon array, silent until now, discharged in one searing pulse, a spear of collapsed mass launched at a fraction of light speed. It struck the reactor core, and the universe broke. A brilliant rupture tore through Theron Lax's orbit, blooming outward in a crown of fire and shattered light. The shockwave rippled across the void, folding and refolding the wreckage into an expanding ring of incandescent death, an orbiting halo of annihilation. The remnants of ships, stations, and command platforms spun outward in glowing arcs, a burning wreath crowning the fall of two empires. On the bridge, the lights flickered briefly, adjusting to the power feedback surge. The crew held their positions, unmoving. In the center of the devastation, at the apex of the forming fire ring, a single holographic signal burst to life, captured by the dying sensors of the last alien ships still capable of broadcasting. Marshal Sigurd Schneider. Standing amid the scorched remains of the command deck, his blackened armor still smoldering, his posture rigid as iron. His face was smeared with ash and blood, one pauldron torn free, but he stood unbowed. The holographic feed captured him perfectly as he lifted his head to face the ruins and the galaxy beyond. His voice, when it came, was low and terrible, carrying with it the weight of Earth's silent centuries. "If you want peace." He paused. The silence stretched, a silence more profound than any barrage of fire or roar of engines. Schneider's lips curled into a grim, blood-stained line. "Prepare for war." The transmission cut. No fade-out, no anthem, only blackness. The battlefield, once a place of screams and flame, now spun in empty, glowing silence. The shattered fragments of 1,000 ships caught in endless orbit around the hollow void where power had once reigned. And beyond Tharenlax, across the cold stars and watching worlds, those who had doubted humanity understood at last. The age of negotiation had ended. The age of reckoning had begun. Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Oh, and one last thing. Every great soldier knows that to survive and become a hero, taking care of yourself is key. So before you go, check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's important. And I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.